Tonight, we travel far north to the quiet edge of coastal Alaska, past the busy cities, past the highways and glowing gas stations, past the last stretch of cell service. There's a small town here, resting between the ocean and the forest. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other's truck, where doors are rarely locked, and where the wind off the water carries the scent of salt and pine. The mountains rise gently behind the town, not sharp and dramatic, but steady and patient. Spruce trees stretch in every direction, thick and dark, their branches moving softly with the breeze. And in late June, the sun behaves differently. It doesn't really set. It lowers itself toward the horizon, then lingers. Midnight arrives, but darkness doesn't. The sky turns pale gold, then silver, then a soft glowing gray that never becomes night. Everything feels suspended, quiet, unhurried. This is where Eliza Warren chose to live. She was 32 when she moved here, a wildlife photographer by trade. I spent years traveling across national parks, waiting hours in silence to capture animals in their natural rhythm. She understood patience. She understood stillness. But over time, the airports, the deadlines, the constant motion began to wear on her. She didn't want noise anymore. She wanted space. So she rented a small wooden cabin at the edge of this coastal town in Alaska. It wasn't fancy, just one bedroom, a wood stove, a narrow porch facing west toward the ocean. But behind the cabin, only a few steps away, a dirt trail slipped quietly into the trees. That trail became part of her daily routine. Every evening around 9:30 p.m., she would step outside and walk. Not for exercise, not to reach a destination, just to listen. The forest here has its own rhythm. The wind through spruce needles sounds different than wind through pine. Moss covers the ground so thickly that footsteps make almost no noise if you stand still long. Enough, you can hear water moving somewhere underground. Eliza loved that. She walked slowly, hands tucked into her sweater pockets, breathing in the cool air. Sometimes she carried her camera. Sometimes she didn't. Often, she simply let the world exist around her. The locals came to recognize her routine. Mrs. Harding, who lived 2 cabins down, would often see her heading toward the trail. Evening walk, she'd call out. Just for a bit, Eliza would reply with a soft smile. It was predictable. Safe, comforting. On the evening she disappeared, everything began the same way. The sky glowed pale gold. The ocean reflected the light like brushed steel. The air felt clean and cool. At 9:40 p.m., Eliza stepped onto the trail. She wore a gray sweater, dark hiking pants, and worn boots. No backpack, no camera, just her phone in her pocket. First stretch of the trail was open and familiar. Spruce trees lined both sides, but the canopy was loose enough for light to filter through. The ground dipped gently in places, and she stepped over exposed roots without thinking. She noticed small things. A spider web catching sunlight between 2 branches. A patch of wildflowers blooming close to the earth. The distant sound of waves below the cliffs. About half a mile into the trail, the path begins to curve inward. The trees arch slightly, forming a wide natural clearing. Locals call it the Quiet Bend. There's no sign marking it, no official name, but everyone who's walked the trail long enough knows the spot. Because sound changes there. Wind softens. Birds grow quiet. Even your own breathing feels louder. Eliza had passed through the Quiet Bend dozens of times before. She never mentioned anything strange about it, but that evening something held her attention. A couple walking their dog later reported seeing her there around 9:55 p.m. She was just standing still, the woman said afterward. Not scared, just listening. The dog had paused briefly, ears raised, staring toward the trees beyond the clearing. Then it tugged forward and they continued down the trail. They were the last people to see her. Back in town, the sky remained bright long past 10:30 p.m. The sun hovered just above the horizon, refusing to disappear. Porch lights flickered on out of habit, not necessity. When Eliza didn't return home by midnight, Mrs. Harding noticed. It wasn't panic, not yet, just a small shift, a quiet absence. By 1:30 a.m., a few neighbors gathered and walked the trail with flashlights, though they barely needed them. The sky still glowed faintly silver. They found her phone. It was placed gently on a flat rock near the Quiet Bend, not dropped, not damaged, just resting there. The screen was dark. No emergency call, no final message, no sign of urgency. Search teams arrive at first light. The first light looked no different from midnight. Dogs picked up her scent easily. They followed it from the trailhead, through the first stretch of forest into the clearing. Then about 40 yards past the quiet bend, it stopped, not faded. Stop. The dogs circled, confused. Handlers tried again. Same result. Her tracks were faint but visible in the soft earth leading toward a cluster of trees. And then nothing. No signs of struggle. No torn fabric. No disturbed brush. The forest looked untouched. Some believed she encountered wildlife, but there were no tracks. No claw marks, no blood. Others suggested she may have wandered off trail and fallen, but search teams covered miles in every direction. Nothing. Weeks passed. The town remained quiet, but something had shifted. Hikers avoided the quiet bend at dusk. Coupled with the dog chose a different route. Even Mrs. Harding stopped looking toward the trail after 9:30 p.m. A few hunters mentioned something unusual. They described moments deep in the woods where all sound stopped at once. No wind, no insects, no birds. Just a low, faint hum that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Not mechanical, not animal, almost melodic, but no one could trace its source. Years have passed now. The trail still exists. Moss still blankets the ground. The ocean still breathes against the cliffs below. The quiet bend remains. If you stand there today, you might notice how the air feels slightly heavier, how sound seems absorbed, how your footsteps disappear almost completely. It's not frightening, it's simply aware. Eliza Warren was never found. No explanation ever came. Only the memory of a woman who stepped into a glowing Alaskan evening for a short walk and did not return. Sometimes in places where the wilderness stretches endlessly, answers don't arrive. Sometimes the forest does not take. Sometimes it keeps. Now breathe slowly. Imagine the pale northern sky hovering above you, the wind moving gently through spruce branches, the distant sound of waves below the cliffs, and somewhere deep within the trees, a clearing where sound changes, the quiet bend remains, and the sun still refuses to set. Now, the snowfall that changed everything. The story begins in a small town in northern Vermont, not far from the Canadian border. Kind of town where winters are long, mornings are quiet, and the air smells like pine trees and wood smoke. Her name was Emily Carter. Emily was 32, lived alone in a small white house at the edge of town, and worked remotely as a graphic designer. She loved soft music, warm sweaters, and the way snow made everything feel quiet. But lately, she had been feeling something heavy inside. Not sadness exactly, just tired. Tired of always being strong. Tired of doing everything on her own. Tired of pretending she didn't want more. It was early December when the first real snowfall came. Emily woke up before her alarm. The world outside her bedroom window looked different, softer, brighter. She sat up slowly and walked to the window. Snow. Fresh, untouched snow covered the trees, the road, the roof of her neighbor's barn. It was thick and clean and peaceful. She wrapped herself in a blanket and just stood there. For a moment, everything felt still, and something inside her whispered, maybe this winter will be different. A morning decision. Emily made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, watching the snow fall gently outside. She opened her laptop to start work, but instead she didn't. She stared at the snowfall. Then she closed the laptop. For the first time in months, she decided not to rush. She put on boots, a thick coat, mittens, and stepped outside. The cold air hit her cheeks softly. It wasn't harsh. It was refreshing. She walked slowly down her driveway, leaving the first footprints in the snow. It felt symbolic somehow, like starting over. As she reached the road, she noticed someone across the street struggling to clear snow from a truck. A man, tall, dark green jacket, beanie pulled low over his ears. He was shoveling slowly, like he didn't mind the cold. Emily hesitated. She normally wouldn't talk to strangers, but something about the quiet morning made it feel okay. She walked over. Need an extra shovel? She asked, smiling. The man looked up, surprised. Then he smiled back. Won't say no to that. His name was Daniel Brooks. He had recently moved into the old farmhouse across from Emily's house. He was originally from Montreal, Canada, but had decided to relocate after buying the property. I guess I underestimated Vermont snow, he said with a laugh. Emily laughed too. You'll get used to it. They shoveled together for nearly 30 minutes. They didn't talk much at first, but the quiet didn't feel awkward. It felt easy, slow conversations. Over the next few days, the snow kept falling. Emily and Daniel started running into each other almost every morning. Sometimes they'd help each other clear driveways. Sometimes they'd just wave. Then one afternoon, Daniel knocked on her door. Emily opened it, surprised. He held 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want a break from working," he said. "I made too much." She hesitated for half a second. Then she stepped aside. Coming, they sat at her kitchen table, the same place where she had watched the first snowfall. They talked about small things, favorite winter foods, best Christmas movies, the difference between Vermont maple syrup and Canadian maple syrup. Daniel teased Montreal winds. Emily pretended to be offended. "You're brave saying that here." They laughed. But underneath the laughter, something gentle was building, not loud, not dramatic, just warm. Past they carried. One evening, as snow drifted quietly outside, Emily found herself opening up. "I moved here after my engagement ended," she admitted softly. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I thought I had everything figured out. Wedding planned, house chosen, future mapped out." She looked down at her hands. Then he changed his mind. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's hard." "It was," she said. "I told everyone I was fine, and eventually I was. But sometimes I still wonder if I missed something." Daniel leaned back slightly. "I moved here because my dad passed away last year," he said quietly. "The farmhouse was his dream. He wanted to retire here, but he never got the chance." Emily looked at him. "I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone," he replied gently. "It's easier to talk about snow than grief." They both smiled softly. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt safe. 2 people, 2 quiet losses, sitting in a warm kitchen while snow fell outside. The storm. A week before Christmas, a big snowstorm hit. Power went out across town. Wind howled against windows. Emily wrapped herself in blankets and lit candles. Then she heard a knock. She opened the door to find Daniel standing there with a flashlight and a portable heater. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, just cold. Come over to my place," he said. "I have a fireplace." Emily hesitated only for a moment. Then she grabbed her coat. By the fire, Daniel's farmhouse felt old but comforting. The fireplace crackled softly. Snow tapped gently against the windows. They sat on the floor with blankets and mugs of hot chocolate. The room glowed orange from the firelight. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, everything felt warm. Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not excitement, not butterflies, just steady warmth. Daniel told stories about his childhood in Montreal, skating on frozen ponds, winter festivals, his dad teaching him how to fix things. Emily shared memories of decorating Christmas trees with her mom, baking cookies late at night. They talked for hours. At some point, the storm began to slow. The wind softened. The world outside quieted again. Emily looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not making this winter feel lonely." Daniel didn't answer right away. He just looked at her in the firelight. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said gently. The words settled in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear them. A Christmas morning. The storm cleared just in time for Christmas. Snow sparkled under bright sunlight. Emily woke up to a text. "Check your porch." She opened her door. A small wooden box sat there. Inside was a tiny maple syrup bottle with a note, "Vermont wins. But Montreal is a close second. Daniel." She laughed. Later that day, she walked across the street with homemade cookies. Daniel opened the door. "You win this round," he said. They spent Christmas afternoon together. Nothing dramatic, just cooking dinner, listening to soft music, watching snow fall again. At one point, Emily stepped outside alone. She looked at the sky. The same sky that had felt heavy weeks ago now felt different, lighter. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because she wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Daniel stepped outside and stood beside her. "Cold?" he asked. "A little." He gently placed his arm around her shoulders. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't intense. It was calm, and Emily realized something simple. Sometimes the biggest changes don't happen in loud moments. They happen quietly, like snowfall, dot soft, dot steady, covering everything gently until the world looks new again. What changed? winter didn't magically solve all her fears. She still had doubts, still had moments of overthinking, but now she had someone who knocked on her door during storms, someone who listened without trying to fix everything, someone who understood quiet grief, and she began to understand something else too. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with 2 cups of coffee on a snowy morning. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Sometimes it arrives slowly enough that you don't even notice until one day you realize you are not alone anymore. Closing calm. So tonight, as you listen to the story, imagine soft snow falling outside your window. Imagine a warm kitchen light. Imagine someone who sees your quiet strength and stays. Because life changes gently sometimes, not with noise, but with snowfall. And maybe, just maybe, your winter will change everything too. Now, the kind of place where the horizon feels endless, where mountains roll gently instead of rising sharply, where rivers run clear and cold over smooth stones. Cedar Creek winds quietly through a remote valley about 40 miles from the nearest town. It's not marked by a large sign. You find it by following a narrow 2-lane road that eventually becomes gravel and then becomes dirt. The air here smells different than Alaska. It's drier. It carries the scent of pine bark warming in the sun, river water moving steadily over rock, and faint traces of campfire smoke that linger long after flames die down. During summer, the valley feels peaceful. Crickets hum in the evening. The wind moves slowly through tall grasses. Deer step carefully along the edges of tree lines at dusk. About half a mile beyond the bend in Cedar Creek Road, tucked between tall ponderosa pines, stands a small wooden cabin. That cabin belonged to Daniel Harper. Daniel was 63 years old, a retired high school history teacher from Idaho. After 40 years in a classroom, he decided he wanted quiet summers, just him, a wood stove, and a stack of paperback novels. He bought the cabin 2 years before he disappeared. It wasn't fancy. No electricity lines ran to it. A small solar panel powered a few lights inside. Water came from a hand pump near the creek. The nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away, but that's exactly what Daniel liked. He enjoyed mornings on the porch with coffee in a metal mug. He enjoyed the sound of wind through pine trees. He enjoyed the way the sky turned orange and pink in the evening without any city lights to compete with it. He wasn't a survivalist. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply liked being alone, but not isolated from the world entirely. Once a week, he drove into town for groceries. He called his daughter Melissa every Sunday evening around 7 p.m., and he always answered when she called. The week it happened began like any other. The weather was mild, late July, warm during the day, cool at night. The creek ran steady but calm. Grasshoppers clicked in the tall weeds near the road. On Thursday evening, Daniel called Melissa instead of waiting for Sunday. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes he just wanted to chat. But something about the conversation lingered with her later. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, everything's fine." There was a pause. "You sound tired." He gave a soft chuckle. "Didn't sleep much last night." "Why not?" Another pause. "I kept hearing someone walking outside." Melissa laughed gently. "Probably deer." "That's what I thought." Another small silence. "But deer don't usually walk in circles." She brushed it off at first. The cabin was old. Wood expands and contracts. Pinnacones fall. Small animals move through brush. "They're just not used to how quiet it is," she said. "Maybe," he replied, but something in his tone wasn't convinced. The next evening, Friday, he didn't call. That wasn't unusual. Saturday passed. Sunday came. Melissa called at 7 p.m. No answer. She tried again at 7:30. Still nothing. Daniel never missed their Sunday call. By Monday afternoon, she contacted the county sheriff's office in Montana. Deputies drove out to Cedar Creek Road just before dusk. The dirt path leading to Daniel's cabin looked undisturbed. No tire marks beyond his own truck parked near the porch. No unusual footprints in the dry soil. The cabin door was slightly open. Not broken, not forced, just open. Inside, everything looked normal. Book lay face down on the small wooden table. A cup of coffee sat beside it, dried at the bottom as if left mid-sip. The wood stove had faint warmth remaining in its cast iron surface. A lantern rested near the door. His wallet was on the counter. His truck keys hung from a small hook on the wall. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared broken. Deputies stepped outside and began walking the perimeter. Behind the cabin, near a patch of tall grass, they found boot prints in the soft dirt. One set Daniel's size. They led away from the cabin toward the tree line. About 30 yards into the trees, the soil became harder. Pine needles blanketed the ground. The tracks faded. Search teams arrived the next morning. They covered miles of forest. Volunteers from nearby towns joined in. Dogs picked up his scent near the back of the cabin and followed it briefly into the woods. Then it became scattered, not gone, just confused. One handler later described it as if Daniel had been pacing, moving slowly, turning in small circles, and then walking deeper between the trees. But there were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no broken branches, no torn clothing caught on bark, just forest, still, quiet. Locals began to talk. Some remembered hearing unusual sounds at night, not loud, not alarming, just slow, steady footsteps on gravel that seemed to move without direction. One man who camped near the creek reported waking around 2 a.m. to what he described as someone walking slowly around my tent. When he looked outside, no one was there. The ground was dry, no tracks. Others dismissed it as imagination. Remote places can play tricks on the mind. When it's quiet enough, even your own heartbeat feels amplified. But Melissa couldn't shake the final words of her father's Thursday call. Deer don't usually walk in circles. Weeks turned into months. Summer shifted toward early fall. Pine needles began to gather in thicker layers on the forest floor. The creek ran slightly lower. Daniel was never found. Not a jacket, not a boot, not a single clear sign of what happened. The cabin remains standing today, weathered a bit more, porch boards slightly faded by sun, but still intact. If you visit Cedar Creek Road and follow the dirt path half a mile past the bend, you'll see it there between the trees. The air feels calm. The wind moves gently through pine branches. You might hear the creek flowing nearby. If you stand very still near the back of the cabin, near the edge of the tree line, you may notice how sound behaves differently, how footsteps on gravel seem louder than they should, how the forest absorbs noise just a few feet in. It isn't frightening, it's simply vast. Sometimes in wide open country a person can step beyond the edge of familiarity, and the land does not give them back. Daniel Harper went outside one night, perhaps to check a sound, perhaps to satisfy curiosity, perhaps simply to listen, and somewhere beyond the glow of his cabin light, the trees closed quietly behind him. Now take a slow breath. Imagine the Montana sky stretching endlessly overhead, the scent of pine and cool evening air, the soft rush of Cedar Creek moving over stones, a small wooden cabin resting between trees, a cup of coffee left unfinished, and a single set of boot prints leading into the forest and never returning. Now we travel west to the wide open skies of Montana, out where the land stretches endlessly, where golden fields move slowly in the wind, where sunsets seem larger than life, and silence feels natural instead of empty. There is a small ranch town there tucked between low mountains and long country roads, a place where people wave as they pass each other, a place where time doesn't rush, and this is where Noah Bennett decided to begin again. Noah was 36 years old, tall, quiet, the kind of man who thought carefully before speaking. He had spent most of his adult life in Chicago working in finance, long hours, glass buildings, constant noise. From the outside, he had everything inside. He felt disconnected. 2 years earlier, he had been engaged. The relationship had ended not with shouting, but with distance. Small disagreements that slowly became silence, plans that quietly unraveled. After that, he buried himself in work, but eventually even success felt hollow. When his uncle passed away and left him a small ranch in Montana, Noah surprised everyone by accepting it. You don't even know how to run a ranch, his friends had said. That's kind of the point, he replied. He didn't want to know everything anymore. He wanted to learn something real. First few weeks were harder than he expected. The mornings were early. The air was colder than Chicago winters, but cleaner. The sky felt bigger. He learned how to mend fences, how to feed horses properly, how to fix small things instead of calling someone else to do it. He made mistakes, burned breakfast more than once, overwatered the small vegetable garden. But each night, when he stood on the porch and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains, He felt a quiet satisfaction. He was tired, but it was an honest kind of tired. One afternoon, while attempting to repair a section of fence near the edge of his property, he heard a truck pull up on the gravel road. He looked up to see a dusty blue pickup and a woman stepping out. She wore worn boots and a denim jacket. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid. "You're fixing that wrong," she called casually. Noah blinked. "Good to know." She walked closer, examining the fence. "You've got the wire to loose. First strong wind and it'll sag." He handed her the pliers without argument. "Show me." Her name was Lily Harbor. She owned the neighboring ranch, had lived in Montana her entire life. She knew the land the way some people know city streets. She tightened the wire with easy strength and stepped back. "There. Now it'll hold." "Thank you," Noah said sincerely. She studied him for a moment. "You're the Chicago guy, right? Word travels fast. In small towns, it always does." She climbed back into her truck, but before leaving, she added, "If you're going to stay, you should learn how to do it right." He wasn't sure if that was a challenge or advice. Maybe both. Over the next few weeks, Lily stopped by often, sometimes to point out small mistakes, sometimes just to check in. Noah didn't mind. He found her directness refreshing. She didn't treat him like an outsider. She treated him like someone capable of learning. One evening, she invited him to a local gathering at the town hall. "It's nothing fancy," she said. "Just food and music." Noah almost declined. Old habits of staying distant tried to pull him back, but he forced himself to say yes. Town hall was warm and bright. String lights hung from the ceiling. Someone played acoustic guitar near the corner. People introduced themselves easily, shook his hand firmly, asked about Chicago. He realized something surprising. One cared about his former job, but one asked about his salary. They asked if he liked the land, if he'd seen the meteor shower last week, if he needed help with the cattle. It felt different, simpler, better. Later that night, he stood outside the hall to get some air. The sky above Montana was impossibly clear. Thousands of stars scattered across deep darkness. Lily stepped beside him. "City doesn't have stars like that, does it?" she asked. "No," he admitted. "Too much light." They stood quietly for a while. "I left once," she said softly. "Tried living in Seattle. Thought I wanted something bigger. What happened? I missed this." She gestured to the open land. The quiet, the honesty of it, Noah understood. "I think I've been running from quiet," he admitted. She glanced at him. "Why?" "Because when it's quiet, you have to hear your own thoughts." She didn't answer immediately. Then she said gently, "Maybe that's not something to run from." Winter came slowly to Montana. Frost covered the fields in the early mornings. Horses' breath turned visible in the cold air. Noah's hands grew rougher, stronger. He stopped checking his phone every hour, stopped thinking about Chicago almost entirely. One particularly cold evening, a snowstorm moved in faster than predicted. Wind picked up sharply. The sky darkened. Noah struggled to secure the barn doors when Lily's truck pulled in again. "You need help," she said firmly. Together they worked quickly, moving animals into shelter, reinforcing doors, stacking extra hay. The storm hit hard. Snow swirled violently, but inside the barn, lantern light flickered warmly. They sat on overturned buckets once everything was secure, breathing heavily, snow tapping against wood. "You're learning," Lily said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I have a good teacher." She looked at him for a long moment, then away. "Montana doesn't keep people who don't mean it," she said. "If you stay, it's because you choose it." The words settled deeply. He realized he wasn't there to escape Chicago anymore. He was there because something about the land, and maybe about her, felt right. By spring, the fields began to turn green again. Snow melted into small streams. The air warmed. One evening, Noah stood on his porch watching the sunset when Lily walked up the dirt road instead of driving. She stopped at the edge of his steps. "You fixing to stay?" she asked plainly. He didn't hesitate. "Yes, for good," he nodded. She studied him carefully. Searching for uncertainty, there wasn't any. The wind moved softly through tall grass. The mountains in the distance glowed orange under the setting sun. "Good," she said simply, and in that simple word, there was something steady. No grand speeches, no dramatic confessions, just to people who had both left once and chosen to return. Months later, when summer spread warmth across Montana, Noah barely recognized the man he had been in Chicago. He woke early without resentment, worked hard